Dr. Aditi Naruka. Where does your story begin? And when I say that, I'm talking about the story that inspired the work you do on stress, burnout. There tends to be a catalyst moment in the experts that I speak to's lives where something happened which started a chain of events, the first domino that fell, which led them to be sat here. Where does that story begin for you?
My origin story as a doctor with an expertise on stress started as a stressed patient who couldn't find a doctor with an expertise in stress. And I became the doctor I needed at a time when I was in my own stress struggle.
What is the backdrop? What is the situation of stress, the state of stress in the world at the moment? Are we getting more stressed as a people?
We are seeing unprecedented levels of stress in the world. It is affecting every single industry and no country or group, including, all ages, all industries, all races. It is the great equalizer. More now than ever. So as a physician and clinician, those of us who work in the medical field, stress has always been a major problem. We see it with our patients. But now, if there is one silver lining from the recent several years, is that now mental health, stress, burnout, the lexicon has grown, and it is something that people are talking about finally in the C-suite, in other areas where before it was, there was so much taboo. There still is, but it is finally getting the recognition it deserves. And stress right now is higher at greater rates than ever.
What are those rates?
So typically 70% of people have at least one feature of burnout. 72% of people are struggling with stress. And approximately that same number have said that the past several years have been the most stressful of their entire professional careers.
What's happening?
A couple of things are happening. So going back to my own personal stress story, why did I have those palpitations? At night, as I was going to bed, I was developing something called a delayed stress reaction. And what happens is, under periods of acute stress, like the recent events that we've all endured collectively as a global whole, during acute periods of stress, we shore up our internal reserves. As a human being, you often do not crack in that moment. You keep it together at all costs. I've seen this with my cancer patients. They have a cancer diagnosis and they go through the treatment, radiation, chemotherapy, all of it, and they are fine. They do not shed a tear. Then when they get that first clean bill of health from their doctors, they are in my office sobbing and everyone is confused. Why now? What's going on now? Same thing with all of us. You may be feeling this way. I may be too. Right now, it's that feeling of like, okay, we've just lived through the pandemic. We should be celebrating. I'm sure you've seen every headline over the past several years, at least I did. The roaring 20s are coming, the post-pandemic era. The Guardian had a great piece on this. And I remember seeing headline upon headline, and I would just laugh because I would think that is not how the brain works. The reason we are all feeling very much not the roaring 20s is because our brains are built like dams. So what happens is when you are going through a period of stress, you shore up your internal reserves and you keep it together at all costs. That is just how the brain is built. When that acute period of stress is over, so in a cancer patient, the actual cancer treatment, for me as a medical resident going through, the difficult 30-hour work shift and going to bed, and for all of us collectively going through the pandemic experience and the various things that have happened since, we keep it together. But when we have that moment of respite, when that acute stressor is over, then our psychological defenses come down and our true emotions can emerge. And it's often a deluge. And it comes out in different ways. The manifestations of stress are different. But it's this delayed stress response. We are all feeling it, which is why none of us feel like it's the roaring 20s. We are seeing increased rates of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, stress-related disorders, and a general feeling of malaise or fatigue or burnout now, even more than we were back in 2020 or 2021. It's the delayed stress reaction.
What is stress? We should probably define that word. And I'd also like to try and define it against the word burnout. Are they different things? Are they the same thing? Do either of them exist?
Great question. There is a difference between acute stress and chronic stress. Under normal circumstances, we function in resilient mode, and we're governed by the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain, if you put your hand here, right behind the forehead. And it is the part of your brain that is responsible for, in scientific terms, we call it general executive function, or, layman's terms, adulting.
God, mine's huge.
Behind the skull.
Okay.
Memory, planning, organization. This is what our strategic thinking. You're really good at these things, Stephen.
Thank you so much.
The prefrontal cortex is what governs all of that. Under stress, we are governed not by the prefrontal cortex, but by the amygdala. And the amygdala is a tiny almond-shaped structure deep in our brains. You can't touch it. It's not like the prefrontal cortex right behind here. It's like between your ears, deep down. And that is our emotional center. It's the limbic system. And we often call it the reptilian brain because that part of our brain has not evolved the way other parts of our brain have. So it's that, and the response that amygdala creates is the fight or flight response, that stress response in our bodies. So under acute stress, we are not governed by the prefrontal cortex up here. We are governed by our amygdala. Our brains and our bodies are expertly designed to manage acute stress. We are built for managing stress. However, nowadays, so for example, let's talk a little bit about the fight or flight response that the amygdala governs, right? Back when we were all cave people, we were in the forest, we saw a tiger. You would either flee or fight. And there's all of these bodily mechanisms that happen when you are engaged in the fight or flight response. Your heart beats faster. Your lungs start taking in more oxygen. Blood is shunted away from your vital organs and it goes to your muscles. So you can either fight or you can run. Your pupils dilate. There's so many biological, physiological mechanisms that happen with the fight or flight response. Then when that acute threat is over, so you either have fought or you have flown away from the tiger, you have a moment to recalibrate. Modern day times, there are no acute threats anymore. All of our tigers are chronic. Bills, financial troubles, marital conflicts or relationship problems, health issues. So there's this constant low hum of that fight or flight response in the distance. And that is the problem. So acute stress, we are good at. Our brains and bodies are great at managing.
And it serves a role, right?
Of course it serves a role. It's evolutionarily healthy. And we can talk about the differences between healthy stress and unhealthy stress. But when it starts becoming chronic, that is when burnout sets in. Your brain doesn't get time to rest or recharge. It's not like a tiger in the forest where you fight, flee, and then there's like a respite time. So it's just ongoing in the background at a low hum at all times.
What are the symptoms of burnout then? How do I know if I'm burnt out?
The interesting thing about burnout is that the definition is changing. So earlier, when you think about burnout, you know what someone with burnout has, or you might yourself might think like, oh, I know what burnout is. I don't have it. That's a lot of people feel this way. Classic, typical symptoms of burnout: apathy, lethargy, feeling unproductive, not very motivated. And the WHO in 2019 designated burnout as an occupational phenomenon and a clinical syndrome, which was really validating for many people who are feeling that way. This is 2019, way before the pandemic. In 2020, 2021, and 2022, what burnout is looking like has changed. So it is no longer these classic, typical symptoms. Now we are seeing increasingly atypical features of burnout. In one study, 60% of people with burnout had an inability to disconnect from work as their main feature of burnout. So it's not what you think when you're thinking about the face of burnout of someone who's really not interested in work. You could be that person who is engaged in work and can't shut off, and you're thinking to yourself, this can't be burnout. I'm totally, engaged in work. In fact, I can't shut off my brain. You might be experiencing atypical burnout.
Atypical burnout. Because when I think of burnout, I think of like not getting out of bed and losing motivation. But you're telling me that my addiction to work might be a symptom and a sign of being burnt out.
That's right.
So how do I know? Because I'm addicted to my work. I love my work.
You know when it is different from your baseline. Being addicted to work, you love your work, yes, but you also make time for sleep, relationships and connections with loved ones.
Yeah.
You feel a sense of engagement in the world. It is not interfering with your day-to-day life, so to speak.
Okay.
So when you are feeling that sense of inability to unplug, that means you're checking your phone multiple times per night because you feel like you have to keep up. You are trying to keep up in the hamster wheel situation where you just can't. And so there are many manifestations of this atypical burnout, but that is one. And so often what's happening now is that people are feeling burnt out. Again, unprecedented rise, right? In stress, chronic stress, and burnout. And often people don't recognize that it's happening to them simply because the face and definition of burnout is changing.
How many people are burnt out? Do they know? Have they done any studies on that to figure out what that number is?
We don't know. I mean, it depends on the sector. So there are lots of studies on burnout. And so one big study, it was done on parental burnout and found that 2/3 of parents have burnout.
2/3? Jesus, 66%.
Yeah. And that is probably underestimated and certainly underreported. So typically we're seeing anywhere rates from 60 to 70% of people note burnout. But again, think about, if based on what we've talked about, if you are feeling like I'm not burnt out. So if you're self-reporting burnout and you're saying, I don't really feel burnt out, I'm very engaged in my work. In fact, I check my email 10 times a night. You could actually be having burnout. There's also a lot of stigma and shame around burnout. So people don't want to come forward and say, hey, I might be stressed or I might have burnout.